father never took off his hat unless he was going into bed or into mass. My mother said he slept in the two places. At that time, every man covered his head. There was respect for the brain then. A delicate instrument. Now, as well as covering the hat is a handy receptacle for catch up. You could give a feed of oats to your half side of a hat. You could collect up apples in the orchard. You could bring in new laid eggs out of the hay shed. Do you know what? You could nearly put a hen hatching in a hat. Well, no, to be a small hen, like a bantam or a guinea hen. Headgear gives a man authority. Like the popes and the kings and the bishops, they know this. They always cover their head when there's something important to say. And where will the storyteller be without his hat as he sits by the fireside to tell the story? In olden days, when people used to be going to the meadow saving hay, they'd bring with them an earthenware jar full of ia ishke. Now, what was that? It was a mixture of new milk and spring water. But the new milk by itself wasn't the thing for the thirst. And of course, the spring didn't have the body in it. And that earthenware jar we put somewhere away from the heat of the sun, and no word of a lie, it was a great man for the thirst. At that time, there was this farmer in the meadow, a very fine day that came after a lot of rain and needed a lot of help. So the earthenware jar gave no battle. By 3 o'clock in the evening, the jar was empty and the men were there, their tongues out with the drought. Now, they were in a happy position that there was a public house not too far away from them. But they couldn't afford to spend the time going there, and so much to be done. That very same year, the farmer had a servant called John the Man. And the only thing I'll tell you about John the Man is he wasn't too correct in the top story. When he should be shaking the hay, he'd be raking, and when he should be raking, he'd be barking at the dog. That class of a fella. And the farmer said to me, much out of pocket if he sent John the Man to the public house for a gallon of porter. So he gave him the empty earthenware jar and the 1 and 4pence and told him to bring a gallon of it. That's all it was at the time, 2pence a pint. Oh my, weren't we all born a bit late. But Johnny said, keep our hat well down our head in case the sun might lean on our brains. So John the Man, he took the empty earthenware jar and the 1 and 4pence and fixed that down. He said, delighted to be going on this errand. And he was singing a little ditty, more fish out is good, no doubt, diddly diddly dum. It shows the neville another bit out, diddly diddly dare. And then he was watching where he was going, and he just tore for something, he fell out in his face and eyes, made flitters of the jar. Got up, put on the handle in his hand, and not even noticing that the jar was broke. He kept going till he came to the public house. And he put the 1 and 4pence up on the counter and he said to the publican, give me a gallon of porter. And the publican took a big white enamel jug to the gallon measure and he bent down behind the counter. Now don't ask me what caper there should be going on with when the porter came in timber barrels. There'd be a pilgrimage from tap to tap. There'd be a big splash out of the flat barrel and a small spot out of the high one to put a collar in it. And when the jug was full, he put it on the counter and he said to John the Man, now, where is our container for this? And to then John noticed that he had the hand in his hand. And he said, that's funny, he said. We were together later in the field. That might be, said the publican, but where am I going to spill this? That put John the Man thinking, he threw out the hand and he began to scratch his head. And he took off his hat to give himself more scope for thought, and he said, you couldn't you spill it in there? And he did. He spilled the porter into the hat, so and he paid for it. And when the hat was full up to the brim, there was still a nice drop left in the bottom of the white enamel jug, and John the Man had to be a pity to have to leave it there. The precious liquid, I think he mentioned to the publican. Should I know, the publican, should I know? But what can you do? Your hat is full. And John the Man said, you couldn't you spill it in there? And he did. He spilled the porter into the top of the hat. And you know John the Man thing. He walked carefully back to the meadow. And when he arrived in the meadow, the farmer and all the men, they collected around him. And the farmer, he's got a small lake of porter on top of the hat. Johnny said, is that all the porter who brought? Well, no, says John, you must think of it, madame. Send the rest of it here. I remember it well, and all that long ago too now, when we'll say New Year's Day or any other Sunday in the year. all the women going into mass had been the same uniform, the shawl. And this time now, well, you'd know the difference between a big farmer's wife and a small farmer's wife, and you'd know the difference between a tradesman's wife and a labourer's wife, from the great variety of shawls they had, from the sober black shawl to the fawn paisley, with that very rich, variegated pattern all around the bottom, and an abundance of tassels. And we had the green and black shawl, greatly favoured by the younger women, and we had the brown shawl and the reddish brown shawl, like you'd see inside the tree. And all these women now, especially if they're wearing the fawn shawl, the paisley shawl, with their heads together outside mass, you know, if it's coming up towards them, we'll think there's a cock of hay, you know, or a tent or something like that, with the legs coming down all around. And the different ways the women had for wearing those shawls. You had the big, fat, jolly woman, and she'd have the shawl thrown back in her shoulders, and she'd giving guff all round. And then you had the woman with the biting tongue, and the hard word for the neighbour. She'd have the shawl pulled down into looking over her face, nothing showing but the nose and the white of the eye. And all the different uses the women had for those shawls. Let's say if we didn't want someone to know what was going on in the kitchen at night, we could make a blind video over the window. Or if the old man in bed said, I feel the cold, and complaining, she'd get up and throw the shawl down, saying, all the fine minute you're up to marry, you a perished old crater. And you know what, you could make a little hood and put it up in her back and put the child sitting into it, or you could lay it out on the floor and put apples into it, or any other commodity, catch it by the four corners, put it up in your back and use it as a mode of transport. But one of the great uses for the shawl was if we were conveying a girl home from a dance, we'd say a ball night now. And I'd come into the shop of the railway and she'd say to you, she said, well, I know what you mean, but the grass is wet. Well, the shawl would come in very handy that day. Do you know what? Men wouldn't know their own ways if they're someone inside in their outfit, put the shawl to so custom to them. And I'll give you an example of that. No, it was Paddy Huber. He was going into the market, it was in the springtime, he was going in buying seed oats. And he was sending in the wife Jude afterwards with the money. She was the treasurer. So, didn't she meet the posh boy with a big parcel of clothes for Jude from the sister over. All domestications of that hour of the morning had to be suspended, for Jude had to open this parcel. And the garments and knick-knacks that want to go to that parcel, she couldn't put in name in them. Well, do you know what, Jude? She took a dress out of it. And if there was one flaw in that dress, there was 1,000. She'd be in grave danger of going anywhere near a beehive with it. And she took a coat out of it, well, a kind of a flaky blue coat, now with it tasted for, and 2 big lavricks of pockets in it. You could nearly put the pecker's buds into them. And Jude, she took a hat out of it. And she looked nothing better but the queen of Mesopotamia, with acres of knitting coming down over her face, and little navy blue dots on it, and a bit of satin tied under her chin. And Jude, God bless her, she took a pair of shoes out of it. And the heels in those shoes were every bit as long as my finger, and every bit as thin. And Jude, she was long and lanky enough as it was, but to the highest drove her up in the wall altogether. She'd been down to see herself inside in the glass. And she looked up at the clock and she was pushing up to 2 o'clock. She said, I better go into town to party with the money. And she said, you know what, it took me so long to get into him. By the time I'd be out of him again, she said, I knock her eyes out to party. Long time since I knocked her eyes out of him. So thus accoutred she hit for town. And not only the people, but the animals that left good grazing in the fields and ran to the ditches of the road to see this craft sailing by. And she was going down the main street in Killarney, and the Jarvis was drawing up to her, car round the lakes, ma'am. And she went up to this man and she said, did you see my husband? Yeah, he said, how would I met your husband? For I was never in America. So, she's seen Patty over in the square now. And when Patty seen this apparition sailing over towards him, he said, you know what, wasn't she very freak-making for a stranger like? And he said, hello, Patty. Hello, Pat. Patty, there's the money for the seed odds. Looking in through the net, and he saw her face inside. Well, Jude, he said, if that's all, what must your sister in America be like? Got a